Hello again, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for this Sunday's edition of Alaska Weather on this 30th day of January 2022. One day left in the first month of 2022. I'm David Percy. Up first here, hazardous weather graphic. Blizzard warning out until noon Monday for the eastern Arctic coast, including Kaktovik, Barter Island, Flaxman Island, those areas, due to whiteout conditions and blowing snow with winds gusting 40 miles an hour or better, going on throughout the afternoon today, continuing throughout tonight, and then starting to improve tomorrow, but the warning's out until about noontime. But there'll be considerable improvement tomorrow afternoon with the winds dropping off. And that's it for watches, warnings, or advisories around the state. That's the only one up there in the eastern Arctic coast. And pretty intense storm moving northward there brought strong winds to the eastern Aleutians, central eastern Aleutians, and some winds all the way up on the southwest coast. Tooksuk Basin, north gusting 58 miles an hour, peak wind gusts there, but the strongest wind gusts occurred at Nikolsky. They had, with the low center tracking just to the west as it pulls northward, they had peak wind gusts so far 77 miles per hour. On Alaska, peak wind gusts southeast 65 miles an hour. Atka had northeast winds to about 45 miles an hour, as did St. Paul Island, northeast gusting 45 miles an hour. And Cold Bay, not quite as windy there, ahead of the front, gusting to about 40 to 45 miles an hour across the western Alaska Peninsula. Otherwise, high pressure in over the interior kept it cold and some places generally clear, with temperatures well below zero through the afternoon across much of the interior there down west of the Alaska Range. And lower pressure in the Gulf of Alaska, especially off the southeast coast, and the high pressure over the inland areas allowed winds. Resurrection Bay, Seward had a peak wind gust out of the north to 43 miles per hour during the day today and into the afternoon. Otherwise, that low center brought colder temperatures, lower snowfall levels over the panhandle today, with snow ended after, or Skagway had snow this morning, but that's ended by noontime. They picked up a couple inches of new snow there. Temperature is about 30 degrees and currently falling. And Juneau had some wet snow going today, as well as Klawock, seeing some wet snow all the way down, with the snowfall levels down to near or just above sea level, as that low center tracks off the south coast there will continue eastward. Otherwise, on the chart today, there's a 970 millibar low, brought the strong winds to the Aleutians there, it's eastern Aleutians, with rainfall amounts not all that heavy. Let's see, about half an inch or 6/10 of an inch falling at Adak. Rain reported across the Fox Islands with those strong winds, and snow, Cold Bay, getting to be a wet snow as temperatures start to push into the upper 30s there. So probably start switching over to rain at any time there. And winds probably increase this evening. Probably will see gusts over 50 miles an hour before they start to diminish. Otherwise, the snow and blowing snow on the eastern Arctic coast, that's about it for interior Alaska. Some lingering clouds, Cook Inlet on down toward Kodiak Island. Most areas clearing out, especially over the eastern North Gulf Coast. Drying out over the northern panhandle this afternoon, with the light scattered showers occurring over the central and southern areas with that low near the coast. That'll drop off to the southeast, and by about 3 a.m. tomorrow morning, it'll be east of the Queen Charlottes, but a lingering trough extending back. Keep a risk of some snow showers going, mostly Dixon entrance, could clip Metlakatla, Heidelberg area, and maybe some snow showers over the border there, eastern border, due to upslope conditions there. But drying out, Lincoln Glacier Bay, winds increasing north, coming up to gale force winds possibly by tomorrow morning. And otherwise clear cold, temperatures lows 25 to 45 below over interior Alaska, west and north of the Alaska Range, and could fall below zero in the clear if we lose the clouds over south central Alaska, and definitely in the Copper River Basin. As far as that front goes, really starts to wash out. You can see the precipitation field breaking up considerably there. over the Alaska Peninsula, but periods of rain continue tonight and winds on the decrease. Definitely for the eastern Aleutians, that low center pulling back to the northwest a little bit. Look for the strong winds to try to push into the Pribilofs. It looks like the strongest winds will stay west of the Pribilof Islands, but probably see some gale force winds coming in and definitely into St. Matthew Island. Winds will be on the increase, tightening gradient there for St. Lawrence Island, but should stay dry and mostly clear. Ridging over the western Aleutians ahead of the next system will make for light winds and maybe some clearing. And moving on to the outlook for Monday, remnants of that front bring some moisture into the southwest coast, form of some light snow and a little bit of a pickup in the winds there, especially for Nunivak Island, and break over the Pribilofs. Winds turn more southerly, southeasterly, and lighter winds, warmer temperatures there. Lingering rain showers, rain and snow for the Alaska Peninsula. Another low center kind of developing, not nearly as strong as the one that came up today, but it'll be south of the Fox Islands there. So much lighter winds for Unalaska and Nikolsky. And the Alaska Peninsula could possibly still see some minimum gale force winds at times. Definitely small craft advisory level winds. Clouds on the increase, Kodiak Island, but should stay dry, and improving conditions over the eastern Arctic coast, with the northern panhandle looking drier and breezy and colder, and some snow shower chances still over the southern panhandle. And moving on to the outlook for Tuesday, we can see that another front starts to approach the panhandle there. So on the north coast, looking for increasing chances of probably starting out as snow, and then that'll mix with rain late in the day or toward evening, but staying dry over the remainder of the panhandle, increasing rain and snow along the North Gulf Coast, starting out as snow, changing to mixed rain and snow in the afternoon. Rain for Kodiak Island. Definitely warmer temperatures and cloudier conditions, with snow pushing up across just about all of from the southern Copper River Basin, across Manus to Sitten Valley, northern Cook Inlet, Kuskokwim Valley, Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. Maybe some flurries as far north as St. Michael to maybe Unalakleet. But definitely windier conditions, St. Lawrence Island and the Bering Strait, as well as interior Alaska. Looks pretty windy. Delta Junction could see gusts 45 miles an hour there. Indian Mountain, maybe 40 to 45 mile an hour wind gusts with that gradient. But much slacker gradient for the Pribilofs in the southern Bering Sea. But the next low south of Adak and Atka might start to increase some winds late in the day for the central Aleutians, but winds staying light farther to the west. And looking at lows for tonight, definitely below zero up over the interior, 30 to 45 below, or 25 to 45 below for the overnight lows, and mid-minus 20s for the Copper River Basin. Otherwise, teens, mid-teens for the northern panhandle, upper 20s down to the south, and lows in the lower 20s for Kodiak Island. Otherwise, 10 to 25 below west of the Alaska Range, near 0 to 5 below for the Bristol Bay area. Near 0 right along the outer coastline, and lower 20s for the Pribilofs, mid-30s for the central Aleutians, lower 30s shimmy in that too, upper 30s for Unalaska. Highs for tomorrow, below 0 north of the Alaska Range, central interior, and highs near 30 below for the Chalk-Yitzhak, Fort Yukon locations, and 10 to 15 below for the central interior, northern Kuskokwim Valley about 5 below, but towards Sleepmeat looking for a high maybe 10 above, upper 20s for Bristol Bay, and lower 20s for the Kuskokwim Delta, near 10 for St. Lawrence Island, mid-30s for the Pribilofs, definitely warmer air coming in there, and upper 30s for the Aleutians to near 40 or a little above for the Fox Islands and Alaska Peninsula, mid-30s Kodiak Island, and upper teens over the Panhandle, quite a contrast there to upper 30s down to the south, followed by lows Tuesday morning, down to around 10, Skagway, Haines area, mid-20s, Sitka, Port Alexander, upper 20s down toward Dixon Entrance, right around 20 for the Yakutat area. But Copper River Basin, Gulkana, 30, 35 below, down to 35 to 45 below Toke, Northway, Eagle, and 40, 45 below for the Yukon Flats, and 20 to 35 below for the North Slope, mid-teens, or about 15 below for the Arctic coast, and falling a shade below freezing for the Pribilof Islands, otherwise lower 30s for the central Aleutians, and lower to, or in the 30s for the Alaska Peninsula, right around freezing for Kodiak Island. And highs Tuesday afternoon, near 20 over the northern panhandle to mid-30s down to the south, upper 30s Kodiak Island, and teens and lower 20s, south central Alaska, but Homer, Seldovia pushing up to near 30 degrees, staying below zero in the Copper River Basin. Taking a closer look, mid-teens for the lows tonight, northern Panhandle to near 30 down to the south, and say McGrath-Nikolai lows 22 below, 22 above for Kodiak Island. Highs for tomorrow, mid-30s Kodiak Island and mid to upper 30s for the southern Panhandle, but trying to put, not even reaching 20 up towards Skagway and Haines, followed by Tuesday morning lows about 20 below there for the Kuskokwim Valley. And near freezing for Kodiak Island, Kenai, Soldotna, inland areas of the Kenai Peninsula falling a little below zero and also below zero in the Susitna Valley areas, followed by highs in the mid-teens to lower 20s, south central Alaska, and 20 to 25 for the northern Panhandle, lower 30s to the south. Up to the north, lows tonight 25 to 45 below, followed by highs 15 to 30 below, warmer on the Arctic coast, followed by lows again 25 to 45 below.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And on to flying weather, IFR Central Eastern Arctic coast, but south of the Brooks Range, VFR. All the way down to the Gulf of Alaska, some marginal VFR over the Panhandle, marginal over southern Kodiak Island, across the Alaska Peninsula, to just south of Nunivak Island and St. Matthew Island, IFR Pribilof's westward, but north of Adak and Atka, VFR Shimmy and Attu, and some IFR there on the southern coast of the Alaska Peninsula. And for the day for Monday afternoon, IFR Eastern North Slope Arctic coast, and then a narrow band of IFR across the northern Bering Sea just north of St. Matthew Island, down across western Nunivak Island, then expanding as it heads southeastward across the Alaska Peninsula and Unalaska Island, marginal VFR, Unmak Island out to Adak, VFR Mchitka to Shimian Attu, and St. Lawrence Island northward through the Bering Strait into the Chukchi Sea VFR, interior Alaska south of the Brooks Range, all VFR into the Gulf, down into northeast Bristol Bay, Lincoln Isle Glacier Bay, eastern North Gulf Coast VFR, but some IFR over toward the eastern border of the Panhandle. And for Tuesday morning, IFR making some progress into the southwest interior, as well as now all the way across Kodiak Island into southern Kamishak Bay. Marginal VFR creeping up into the southern part of the Kenai Peninsula, mostly along the coast, not quite into Kachemak Bay. Stays VFR in the interior and some IFR eastern Arctic coast, and becoming VFR for the Panhandle. And the western Bering looking pretty good, VFR conditions with some marginal VFR from Amchitka Island eastward to Nikolsky. And for Tuesday afternoon, zone of IFR, northern Bering Sea into the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta coast, mostly the Kuskokwim Delta, across the Kuskokwim Valley into the western Alaska Range there, northern Bristol Bay and Kamishak Bay, down across the Barren Islands, Fognak Island, all the way down to about Pasagchak on Kodiak, and southern Kodiak, southwest areas, Shelikof Strait, marginal VFR, marginal for Alaska Peninsula, and the eastern Aleutians, IFR Adak and Atka, marginal VFR up along hugging the coastline of the Panhandle to about Cape St. Elias, and you hit IFR there, westward to Resurrection Bay up into western Prince William Sound, but the central interior, VFR. Passes, marginal VFR for both Anatuvik and Adigan for the day Monday, but Lake Clark, Merrill, good VFR continuing with Rainy looking good, VFR for tomorrow. Monday, VFR for Windy, Isabel and Mentasta both staying VFR, and as well as Tanita, good VFR, ceilings visibilities unlimited for Portage, Chilkoot and White becoming VFR. Freezing levels 2,000 to 4,000 feet coming northward in across Cape Newnham into Togiak Bay, 4,000 feet, 2,000 feet up toward Bethel, 6,000 feet back to the Alaska Peninsula, but at the surface, at that warmer air aloft moving over the colder air at the surface. So that's still south of Kodiak Island and the North Gulf Coast, but well north of the Fox Islands, but south of the Pribilofs. Icing, not too bad. Maybe some scattered light icing possible. Mixed variety, southern Panhandle up to Port Alexander. Northern Kodiak Island, threat of some icing along the southwest coast and to about Cape Romanzoff. And out over the Bering Sea, areas of, and some icing possible for the western Aleutians, but nothing very significant at all. Jet stream northwest jet, 100 knots across the northern panhandle, 105 knots across the Gulf of Alaska. South-southwest, 125 knots, diminished to about 90 knots over the Alaska Peninsula. And at 9,000 feet, north winds into from the Arctic right down into the central interior, really diminished though. High pressure ridging from the Russian coast there into the western Alaska range, and keeping winds fairly light, about 50 knots out of the south-southeast across the Alaska Peninsula into the southeast Bering, even stronger there around that low over the western Bering. And at 3,000 feet, south 55 knots, just east of that low center, southwest of St. Matthew Island. Across St. Lawrence Island, east-southeasterlies increasing to 45 knots. Light winds over interior Alaska, a little brisk on the eastern Arctic coast, maybe 30 to 35 knots at the most there, but light over the panhandle. And 45 to 50 knot southeasterlies across the Alaska Peninsula results in considerable moderate chop there for the Alaska Peninsula, Bristol Bay, Togiak Bay, St. Lawrence.
Hello again, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with the National Weather Service with another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. And joining me today are not just one, but two people, both with the last name Stevens, which is even more fun, but no relation. We have Eric Stevens from GINA and George Stevens, who is a mechanical engineering student from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Did I get that right?
Yep.
Awesome. And today you guys brought a really cool toy, or I should say tool, with you. It's a sandbox, but why are you guys working on a sandbox?
Well, it's part of our senior design project, and we were approached by EPSCoR to build this for them. They had a proof of concept that they developed about a year ago, I think, and they wanted a more robust version that they could pack onto a plane and take places, and it's a handy learning tool for kids and adults.
So you're a mechanical engineering student. You've built a traveling sandbox for the experimental program to stimulate competitive research, EPSCoR, and GINA's facilitated this. But why do we need a traveling sandbox?
Well, the prototype was such a big hit that they decided they wanted another one, actually two, that that would be easier to travel with, possibly marketable even.
Okay, so this is a traveling sandbox that's got a lot of bits and pieces and a computer hooked up to it. What is the computer doing with the sand?
The computer actually uses a Kinect sensor to read the topography of the sand or the shape of the sand, and then the computer translates that into information which it projects using a projector onto the sand, showing topographical lines and which is representative of the shape of the sand.
Okay, so this is a live mapping tool?
Yeah. It's interactive. As you're moving your hands through it, it is actively following and changing the lines to fit what you're doing.
That sounds like something I could have in my backyard.
Yep.
It'd be a lot of fun. So you guys had to change the design a little bit to make this more Alaska-fied, right?
Yeah.
Okay, how'd you do that?
Well, the original was made out of basically lumber and Simpson strong tie type stuff, and we rebuilt it to make it lighter and basically more transportable. We can pack it down to a fairly small size, and it can be loaded onto a plane and flown anywhere in the state.
Which you guys did today. And you have plans to take this in other places of Alaska, right?
Yep, we're actually going to be headed down to Homer with it later today.
Okay, very good. Eric, how does this fit into science learning around Alaska?
Well, you know what? I think it is a tool and it is a toy. And it brings out a smile from an 8-year-old and the smile from a 48-year-old with that inner 8-year-old wanting to get out. The sandbox, it's an interactive learning tool that teaches us how topography in the 3 dimensions is related to, say, a 2-dimensional map. More about that later. Just like George was saying, it's got a Kinect sensor, not just for video games anymore. It can sense out the lay of the land there, feeds that information in the computer. Computer identifies that, sends a signal to a projector to send topographic lines to map over that lumpy ground. So you get a 3-dimensional topo map out of it. And my favorite thing about it, this is the thing that stops people at the trade show, they stop at your booth and don't leave, is that you run your hand through that sandbox and it responds in real time. It remaps the topography as you get to be Mr. Tectonic Plate Drifter there. You can make things how you want. Well, what if we made a really high mountain here and a low valley there, and the lines adjust to what you did? It's a learning tool because it shows you that connection between these two-dimensional topo lines and what's really out in Alaska. And Alaska's a place with all kinds of topography. You know, we're from the Great Plains, where topo maps tend to be just like blank pieces of paper, but Alaska is particularly gifted in this regard, and this tool helps us, I think, learn more about our state, really.
Absolutely. And so this is going to enhance STEM learning, the science, technology, engineering, and math, in many different locations around Alaska. Then this would be something that kids and teachers can get their hands on.
It sure is. And I mentioned the it's like fly paper at a booth that, or at the Science Potpourri when we had Greg's original version of this sandbox, and that one was made out of scraps of wood, and it was a prototype. But even that one, before it had some of the refinements that George and crew have made for this newer, upscaled, maybe a 2.0 version of the sandbox, even that one was so attractive to people. It just demonstrated that this has potential to be a learning tool, an outreach tool, an education tool that now is portable and can go places in Alaska. Of course, there's only one sandbox, can't be everywhere at once, but hopefully it gets out there, gets the word out about EPSCoR and what science is being done here for Alaskans.
All right, that sounds really interesting, and I can't wait to get my hands in the sand and try this out for myself. We're going to demonstrate this here in our next segment of Alaska Weather Facts, but before we go, we want to remind you that EPSCoR, which is a new acronym for me now, but I'm going to remember this because you can follow them on Facebook and Twitter, and I invite you to do that. Alaska EPSCoR is also something that facilitates science learning at the University of Alaska around the state, and that stands for Experimental Program to Stimulate Competitive Research. So check that out, and make sure you tune in tomorrow because we're going to have the next version where we actually get our hands in the sand and check out how this works and demonstrates that topography. So for now, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with this edition of Alaska Weather Facts, and we'll see you again next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Looking at today's sea ice analysis, the thinner ice getting in close to St. Paul Island from Northeast Point there, but that's about as far as it's going to get as the winds will become more easterly and then southeasterly and then south-southeasterly and diminish on Tuesday. Moving on to coastal water forecasts. For the Panhandle, pretty light winds on the south coast for Monday, northwest 10 to 15 knots, northwest 15 knots over the southern inner channels. But for Stevens Passage, winds will be north at 25 knots. Gale warnings out for Lynn Canal, possibly Glacier Bay, northwest 35 knots sustained, and 15 to 25 knot east winds for the north coast with 8-foot seas. And the outlook for Tuesday, south winds 20 to 25 knots there for the south coast, and for the north coast, east-southeast at 30 knots, so small craft advisories there with seas 10 to 12 feet. Small craft advisories, Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, northern inner channels as northeast winds subside at 25 knots. Northeast 25 for Stevens Passage. Clarence Strait looking at a southeast wind at 20 knots with 4-foot seas. Monday, Prince William Sound looking for light north winds at 10 knots. Light variable winds for the western North Gulf Coast, 10 knots or less, seas 4 feet, northeast 15 there around Middleton Island. Barren Islands east winds 15 knots, and Kamishak Bay, Southern Cook Inlet looking at north winds at 20 knots with 7-foot seas. Light northeast breeze north of the Forelands at 10 knots. That'll pick up to north 20 knots for Northern Cook Inlet on Tuesday. And good gales south of the Forelands, 40 knots from the north, northeast 40 knots. Gale warnings also for Kamishak Bay. Gale warnings for the North Gulf Coast, east-northeasterlies 40 to 45 knots. Barren Islands, gale warnings northeast 45 knots. Prince William Sound, northeast at 20 with 3-foot seas. Kodiak Island, east-northeasterlies tomorrow at 25 knots, 9 to 11-foot seas. Small craft advisories for the Alaska Peninsula for east to southeast winds at 25 knots. Bristol Bay looking at northeast winds at 30 knots. Those will turn east at 30 knots for Bristol Bay on Tuesday. And for the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula, small craft advisories, east winds 25 knots. Pacific side, south at 20 knots. And from Sitkinak to Castle Cape, winds will be southeast at 30 knots. Gale warnings for Kodiak Island, northeast 45 knots there for Shelikof Strait. And for Unalaska Island, kind of a variable wind depending on which side of the island you're on, but 20 to 30 knots for the wind speed there. Unimak Island, southwest at 30 knots. And for Adak and Atka, west winds 30 to 35 knots. Amchitka Island, southwest at 30. And Kiska to Shimia, winds will be south 25. Gale warnings in store for the area from Shimia to Amchitka Island for Tuesday for east-northeast winds 40 to 45 knots. Gale warnings also for Adak and Atka, 35 to 40 knot winds from the east-southeast expected there. Unimak Island, gale warnings southeast up to 35 knots. Small craft advisories for Unalaska Island, south winds 25 knots. For the southwest coast, east winds 30 knots tomorrow. Gale warnings for the Pribilof, southeast 40 knots. And minimum gales for St. Matthew Island, east winds at 35 knots with seas just under 20 feet. Gale warnings for St. Lawrence Island, northeast winds 40 knots. Brisk wind advisories for Norton Sound. Those continue for Norton Sound, actually increased to 30 knots on Tuesday. Gale warnings for St. Lawrence Island, northeast 30 knots and east 35 knots. South of Nunivak Island, otherwise Yukon Delta coast, northeast at 30 knots, 40 knots out of the northeast for St. Matthew Island. Pribilofs, small craft advisories, northeast 25. And for Monday, those winds on the east side there for the eastern Arctic coast coming down, especially in the afternoon, west 15 to 20 knots. Northwest 10 knots for the western and central coast, and from Cape Beaufort to Wales, winds will be north at 15 knots. And then on Tuesday, 20 to 25 knot winds for the western Arctic coast all the way down to Wales in the forecast, but very light winds for the central coast down to 5 knots from the north. West-northwest 10 to 15 knot winds for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. For tonight, blizzard warning out tonight until noon Monday for the Kaktovik, Flaxman Island, Barter Island area. For 40-mile-an-hour wind gusts and creating whiteout conditions and blowing snow, but it'll be clear and cold, below zero over most of interior Alaska. Diminishing snow showers over the southern panhandle, and that intense low drifts into the southern Bering Sea and slowly weakens. The front really starts to wash out over the Alaska Peninsula. It'll hold together enough to keep periods of rain and gusty winds going through tomorrow, with a chance of snow arriving on the southwest coast. Improving conditions for the eastern Arctic coast, and for Tuesday, warmer temperatures and the chance of snowing across southern Alaska.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.